Buckingham Palace, May 2026. Queen Camilla trudged into her bedroom in the East Wing. The deadbolt slams shut from the outside. She was officially under house arrest. All privileges were stripped away. No one was allowed to approach. 2 corridors away, King Charles bowed his head on his desk. He cried. For the first time, the monarch's tears fell in front of others. Prince William and Sir Timothy Lawrence stood silently on either side. They had just played an audio recording of the royal doctor and the bodyguard, Marcus Hale. How did a counterfeit drug ring infiltrate the king's medical room? What ruthless method did Camilla use to embezzle hundreds of millions of pounds in charity funds? What crime is that secret recording hiding? November 2025. King Charles III entered his second grueling round of cancer treatment. Buckingham Palace tried to maintain a suffocatingly peaceful facade. The king's working schedule gradually thinned out. Daily meetings were cut down. But the press still regularly received photos of him smiling and waving behind the glass window of the Bentley State limousine. Everything in the palace ran as smoothly as a century-old machine. The quiet atmosphere covered up a truth that was rotting inside. Until the morning of May 14, 2026, in the lavish breakfast room of Clarence House, Sir Timothy Lawrence, Princess Anne's husband, was sipping his early morning tea. An urgent news bulletin interrupted the current affairs programme. The London Metropolitan Police had just taken down a massive counterfeit medical drug smuggling ring. The image appearing on the TV screen was a man in his 50s. He was handcuffed, his face bowed down to avoid the cameras as he was escorted into a police van. Timothy dropped the newspaper onto the glass table. Outwardly, to the public, it was just an ordinary economic crime arrest. But Timothy knew that haggard face well. That was the personal doctor assigned to directly care for King Charles's health. The image of the doctor on television immediately triggered a memory from 6 months ago. December 2025, a freezing winter afternoon. Timothy was walking past the private medical room area located deep in the deserted west wing of the palace. The oak door was ajar. Through the small gap, he saw this doctor standing with his back to the door. Opposite him was a royal bodyguard. The bodyguard looked around cautiously, then quickly stuffed a brown paper envelope bulging with money into the doctor's blouse pocket. The incident happened in a flash of 3 seconds, not a word of explanation. There were no receipt documents whatsoever. At that time, Timothy only felt a ripple of unease in his heart. He told himself it was a shady personal transaction. But today, when the doctor was involved in a counterfeit drug ring, that envelope took on a different form. It reeked of crime. To understand the abnormality of this envelope of money, you must thoroughly understand how the royal cash flow operates. At Buckingham Palace, cash in hand is a completely non-existent concept. Every internal expenditure must go through rigorous bookkeeping. From the invoice for a roll of medical gauze to the monthly salary of the healthcare expert team, everything is censored by the Royal Accounting Office, also known as the Privy Purse. Transactions must be triple-cross audited before being paid via electronic bank transfer. The act of a bodyguard giving cash to the monarch's doctor is like a Treasury security guard secretly slipping an envelope to the safe's code keeper. It completely punctures the standard security wall. A state-salaried bodyguard with a fixed income could not suddenly dig out a huge stack of cash to make a personal transaction with a medical expert. That cash flow had to be poured from another source. This source of money was designed not to go through any books. It was completely invisible to all internal audits. More importantly, the king's personal doctor position is a fatal link. This person does not simply cure diseases. This person designs the entire treatment regimen. This person personally prescribes every medication each day. This person has the authority to assess when the king needs a sleeping pill injection to rest and when the king is lucid enough to sign asset transfer documents worth hundreds of millions of pounds. Any shady interference in this position is synonymous with directly manipulating the throne. When the doctor receives under-the-table money and is later arrested for counterfeit drugs, a chilling hypothesis takes shape. King Charles's cancer treatment regimen had been compromised. That envelope of money was not a thank you gift from a patient. It was hush money. It paid for doses of medicine that were swapped or deliberately reduced. The king's life and mind were no longer protected by medicine. They lay entirely in the hands of the one paying the money in the dark. For 48 hours after the news bulletin was broadcast, Timothy Lawrence cut off all contact. He locked himself in a closed office at St. James's Palace. He pulled out dozens of detailed logs of the royal family's travel schedules in December 2025. He meticulously cross-referenced every timeline a cash transaction occurred with King Charles's public medical records. The result that emerged sent shivers down his spine. Right after the week the envelope was handed over, the king's health condition deteriorated abnormally. He had to cancel 3 extremely important meetings with the Prime Minister in just 1 week due to exhaustion from medication side effects. On the night of May 16th, the clock struck exactly 11:30. Timothy put on a dark coat and stepped into a civilian Audi with no diplomatic license plates. He started the engine and drove himself out of the residence in the dark. His destination was Kensington Palace. He deliberately drove around the main gate, entering through the narrow driveway meant for garbage trucks and food deliveries to evade all paparazzi camera lenses. On the second floor, in a small reading room without any surveillance cameras installed, Prince William was already sitting and waiting. The light cast upon the successor's extremely tense face. Timothy sat down on the single chair. He clearly presented every detail of the incident 6 months ago, describing the size of the envelope, the doctor's facial expression, and linking it to the morning's arrest. No embellishments, no speculations. William sat motionlessly listening, but his hands were tightly gripping the armrests of the chair. He gripped so hard that his knuckles turned pale white from suppressing his rage. At exactly 1 a.m., William opened his personal military-encrypted laptop. Using the prerogative of the Prince of Wales, he ordered direct access to the royal family's top-secret personnel data vault. William typed in the identifying features provided by Timothy. December afternoon shift, about 1.8 meters tall, operational area in the west wing of the palace. The artificial intelligence system began to scan thousands of personnel records. It took exactly 40 minutes. The computer screen flashed and returned a single result that matched all parameters. Lieutenant Marcus Hale. This guy was not a guard standing at the gate. Hale served in the inner circle bodyguard team. He had closely shadowed every footstep of senior members for 8 long years. He was the one delivering the money. William immediately clicked on Marcus Hale's profile to check the identity of his direct manager. He needed to know who had assigned this bodyguard to duty in the West Wing. However, what struck his eyes was a bright red text continuously flashing on the storage system. Marcus Hale's employment status was no longer active. It clearly displayed 2 words: has resigned. William hastily scrolled down to the personnel transaction history section. The time Hale's resignation letter was pushed onto the system was 9 a.m. on May 14th. That was exactly 2 hours after the national television station broadcast the news of the royal doctor's arrest. Hale had sniffed out the danger and immediately packed his bags to flee to a remote countryside in Gloucestershire. But what truly suffocated William was not the fact that an accomplice was fleeing. It was the loophole in the application approval process. According to the palace's operational code, the resignation letter of any inner circle bodyguard must be submitted through the sovereign's office. Internal security forces would take at least 2 weeks to review the entire communication history before allowing them to leave. However, Marcus Hale's letter was approved immediately. It bypassed the entire censorship system. The person who pressed the button to approve this letter did not use the Royal Human Resources Department's account. They also did not use King Charles's high-level command code. The letter was passed using a priority electronic identifier issued directly from the server system of Clarence House. That was the private headquarters of Queen Camilla. Why would the Queen's office use supreme privileges to cover up and clear the escape route for a bodyguard who had just given hush money to her husband's doctor? 6 months ago, in the middle of autumn 2025, King Charles III's internal medical report showed an extremely positive result. The tumour was shrinking. His white blood cell count was gradually stabilising. He began taking walks in the flower garden at the Highgrove estate, on his own, without anyone's support. Everyone was thrilled. Except for one person, Queen Camilla. Seeing her husband stretching to welcome the harsh sunlight through the window, an intense fear arose in her heart. Camilla's power was always inversely proportional to the king's health. When Charles lay flat on the hospital bed with a mess of IV tubes tangled in his arms, she was the sole spokesperson. She filtered every report before they were brought into the hospital room. She held total power of life and death over the royal schedule. But if Charles recovered, he would personally take back that key of power. Camilla's status would step back into the background, fitting the role of a wife walking beside the king. Camilla's biggest goal was not to kill her husband. She wanted to maintain Charles's half-awake, half-asleep state. He had to be alive enough so that the throne would not change hands, but weak enough so that every decision had to go through her. To execute this, she personally devised 2 specific actions. First, she used an undeclared personal cash fund to establish a direct bribery ring for the royal doctor. Every week, bulging envelopes of money were sneakily delivered by Marcus Hale. The purpose was to force this medical expert to reduce the dosage of the specific cancer medication to the minimum. Instead of using standard medication, a quantity of low-quality counterfeit drugs was mixed in, so that King Charles was always in a state of exhaustion, breaking out in cold sweats and groggy from incessant aches and pains. The second action took place right in the king's bedroom. Taking advantage of the nights Charles had to use high doses of sedatives to force sleep, Camilla brought in thick stacks of paperwork. Sandwiched between harmless work reports were a series of financial management transfer documents. Charity funds bearing the royal name, notably the Heritage Conservation Trust, worth over £120 million, were gradually transferred to a representative's name. Camilla personally held the pen, threaded it through her husband's trembling fingers, and guided him to sign each scribbled stroke onto the paper. To the public out there, she built a perfect image. A devoted wife keeping watch by the hospital bed day and night, haggard with anxiety. But behind closed doors, she was draining his vitality to plunder his assets. This greed did not erupt overnight. For more than 3 decades, Camilla was always labelled as the third person by public opinion. She endured the contempt. She entered the royal family with the status of someone always stripped away. That insecurity accumulated, turning into an obsession with having to create her own financial empire. Hundreds of millions of pounds from charity funds were her lifelong insurance ticket. If one day Charles passed away and William ascended the throne, Camilla knew full well she would be pushed out into the street. She needed money. Lot of money. Manipulating the king's health was the most ruthless but most effective leverage for her to achieve that. In stark contrast to those calculations, Prince William and Sir Timothy Lawrence had a single goal: to protect King Charles III's life and keep the dynasty from being stained by dirty schemes. William carried within him a wound that would never heal. He had lost his mother, Princess Diana, during the royal family's scandal-filled years. Now, he absolutely could not stand idly by and watch his father slowly die in a trap laid out by the very woman who had replaced his mother's position. For William, this was no longer about protecting the throne. This was a war to protect his own flesh and blood against bottomless greed. Sir Timothy Lawrence, on the other hand, acted based on absolute loyalty to the institution. As a former Vice Admiral of the Royal Navy, Timothy understood very well the danger of a broken chain of command. When the enemy was not on the front lines but sleeping right on the monarch's bed, collapse was only a matter of time. Both of these men were determined to uncover the truth at any cost. William's first action was to break all of the palace's operational rules. He set up an investigation system entirely outside the control of Buckingham's security forces. William knew full well that Camilla's network had extended its octopus tentacles across all departments. He stayed up all night himself, using his military-encrypted personal laptop to infiltrate the personnel system. He dragged every layer of Marcus Hale's protective cover into the light without leaving a single trace of access. The second action demonstrated their extreme resolve. When Timothy brought the cash transaction information to Kensington, the two men did not write any reports. They did not call Scotland Yard. They did not submit the matter to the Privy Council. They went into the office, locked the door, disconnected the Wi-Fi, and threw all their personal phones into an electromagnetic shielding metal box. Their goal was extremely clear: clean up this cancerous tumour before the press caught wind of it. If a scandal about the Queen using counterfeit drugs to poison the King leaked onto the front pages of newspapers, the British monarchy would collapse overnight. They were forced to handle this matter themselves in the shadows, not allowing any outside interference. The morning of May 15th, the air in William's office at Kensington Palace thickened. That afternoon, William urgently called Timothy over. On the solid mahogany desk, William forcefully pushed a colour-printed file folder in front of his uncle. The paper gliding across the desk created a dry, rustling sound. It was a detailed printout of the approval order for bodyguard Marcus Hale's resignation letter. The bright red text, Clarence House Priority Approval, sat imposingly in the bottom right corner. Timothy picked up the paper. His rough fingers gently rubbed the red text. He looked up at William. Neither of them said a word for 10 seconds. That silence was heavier than any screaming. This moment was the first point of impact where the boundary of suspicion was completely shattered, replaced by the naked truth. William slammed his fist onto the desk. The glass of filtered water shook violently, water splashing out. He growled, every word dropping like a hammer. She signed it. She herself used the high-level code to open the door for that bodyguard to escape. She is severing all clues leading back to my father's hospital room. Timothy leaned back in his chair. The former officer's face hardened. He analysed the situation coldly. The time the letter was approved was 9:05 a.m. That was exactly 5 minutes after the resignation request was uploaded to the system. Camilla held the priority seal. She had the power to halt any internal investigation. If they followed the correct procedure and filed a denunciation to the London Police Department, the file would have to go through Buckingham Palace's review office. The news would reach Camilla's ears immediately. Any legal move at this point would be snuffed out by her in the cradle. They were officially confronting the second most powerful force in the kingdom. The direct consequence of this discovery placed William and Timothy at a crossroads of no return. The keyholder to the entire ring, Marcus Hale, was on the run. The distance from London to the Gloucestershire countryside was more than 2 hours of continuous driving. With every passing minute, the likelihood of Hale being tracked down and silenced by Camilla's henchmen increased. Dying accidentally in a traffic collision. Dying from an overdose suicide. There were dozens of ways for a fleeing man to disappear forever without leaving a trace. William reached out to pull his personal security card from the computer, tossing it straight onto the desk. He stared piercingly into Timothy's eyes. "We don't call the police. We don't use diplomatic license plate cars. We don't bring bodyguards. We will go catch him ourselves." It was an unprecedented decision. The person at the top of the line of succession to the British throne decided to personally carry out an overstepping manhunt. No search warrant, no armed forces backup, entirely outside of all legal frameworks. This decision changed the whole dynamic of the story. If they got involved in a brawl in the countryside or were arrested by local police, William's reputation would be shattered. He would be accused of abusing power and trespassing on a citizen's residence. But if they caught Marcus Hale before sunset, they would hold the only living evidence powerful enough to topple Camilla's throne. Timothy gave a firm nod. He grabbed the bunch of car keys. Both men put on dark coats and took the stairs down to the basement. An ash-grey civilian Audi A6 started its engine. The car shot out from the palace's side gate, diving straight into the dense traffic leaving London. A speed race on the M4 motorway. But would the grey Audi catch up to the bodyguard before Camilla's cleaners made their move? At exactly 4:30 p.m, the noisy M4 motorway quickly gave way to the winding, narrow, tree-lined dirt roads of the Gloucestershire countryside. The ash-grey civilian Audi A6, driven by Timothy, conched gravel on the driveway of an old wooden house, completely isolated from the residential area. In front of the porch, Marcus Hale was sweating profusely, grunting as he hoisted a large canvas bag onto the bed of a rusting Ford pickup truck. He was preparing to flee England before the day's end. The sound of screeching brakes tore through the quiet space. The Audi skidded sideways in a long streak, completely blocking the truck's only reverse path. Timothy Lawrence stepped out first, the upright posture of a former Royal Navy officer immediately radiating a heavy intimidation. Hale froze, his hand resting on the side of the truck, dropping down. He looked at Timothy, then his panicked gaze shot straight to the passenger door on the other side. The moment Prince William set foot on the gravel ground, the bodyguard's knees completely buckled. He didn't even bother lifting a leg to run. He knew very well the unwritten rule of the power elite. You can hide from the police, but you can never escape the heir to the throne. Hale slumped down onto the rotting wooden chair on the porch, clutching his head tightly. William stepped forward, his long shadow completely obscuring the trembling bodyguard. He didn't even need to ask a single question. The terrifying psychological pressure from the appearance of the two senior figures had completely broken Hale's will to resist. The man began to confess everything in a broken voice. He recounted in detail every cash handover that took place right in the heart of the palace. Every second Tuesday of the month, at exactly 4:15 p.m. during shift change, he would detour past the storage room of Clarence's house. There, a trusted female aide of Camilla would already be waiting, quickly thrusting a sealed brown paper envelope into his hands. Inside always contained exactly £50,000 in cash, all old £50 banknotes with untraceable serial numbers. Hale confessed to the direct orders from the Queen. She demanded the doctor keep the king always in a state of fatigue, listlessness and exhaustion, but absolutely not allow him to die. The bodyguard described the scene of him standing guard outside King Charles's bedroom door during quiet late nights. Through the ajar door gap, he saw Camilla bringing documents clipped in leather folders into the room when Charles was drowsy from the effects of high-dose sedatives. She would sit down next to the bed, hold his wrinkled hand, whisper fake tender words, then personally press his hand onto the paper to sign orders transferring the management rights of hundreds of millions of pounds from the Heritage Conservation Trust. William stood motionless, listening to every word of the testimony, his jaw clenched so tight that a vein throbbed continuously on his cheek, his knuckles gripping the side of the truck so hard they turned pale white with anger. He was having to listen to a hired hand recount the process of his stepmother draining his father's life in the most ruthless way. Standing right behind William, Timothy Lawrence maintained absolute silence. He didn't yell, didn't swear, nor did he draw a weapon. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his felt coat. His thumb was pressing firmly on the record button on a secure mobile phone, capturing every choking sob and every word of the accomplice's confession with the crispest audio quality. They had secured the most priceless piece of living evidence. But any delay on the way back could cost lives, because the real culprit in London would certainly not sit still, waiting to die. News among the upper class always spreads faster than a wildfire in dry season. At exactly 6 p.m. that evening, as Camilla was reviewing ledgers in her oak-panelled office at Clarence's house, a hidden communication device began to signal. The second secure phone, placed deep inside a desk drawer, vibrated a short beat. On the screen was a mere 10-word message sent by an insider from the Royal Outer Guard team. The Crown Prince is at Hale's house, Gloucestershire area. Camilla finished reading the message but did not panic. She didn't smash things on the desk, didn't scream for security personnel, nor did she call anyone to seek help. Standing on the brink of exposure, she acted with the absolute coldness and precision of someone who had honed survival skills for 40 years amidst the eye of the palace's scandal storms. She immediately pulled out the secret drawer under the desk and took out a black USB drive containing military-grade data wiping software. Plugging it into her personal computer, she initiated a total destruction command. A red progress bar began to run across the screen. It shredded the entire transaction email history, wiped clean the encrypted instruction messages, and erased all traces of the bank account numbers used to divert charity funds to tax havens in the Cayman Islands. In less than 15 minutes, her entire digital financial network evaporated completely, not leaving even a single byte of data for investigative experts to recover. Immediately after pulling out the USB, she picked up the internal phone to call her most trusted personal assistant into the room. Camilla pointed at the pile of leather-bound ledgers placed on the tea table right in the middle of the room. Those were the detailed handwritten notebooks about monthly cash withdrawals and the draft copies of King Charles's signature that she used for practice. She ordered the assistant to throw them all into the glowing red stone fireplace in the corner of the room. Camilla calmly walked over to the liquor cabinet, personally poured herself a gin and tonic, then stood leaning against the fireplace and took a sip. Her unblinking eyes reflected the rising flames, incinerating all the final physical evidence of her treason into pale grey ashes. With the scene wiped clean, she began to set up a perfect play to counterattack the two men rushing towards London. She sat down at her desk, personally drafted a red-stamped confidential document and sent it straight to the Director of Security at Buckingham Palace. In it, she portrayed Marcus Hale as a paranoid bodyguard, having severe psychological problems and being obsessed with power. She cleverly fabricated a story that she had just discovered Hale stealing cash from her personal fund, so she ordered his immediate firing that morning to avoid making a fuss. She asserted the guy was frantically making up stories in an attempt to exact revenge on the royal family. Not stopping there, she prepared to send this forged dossier to a close editor-in-chief at the tabloid with the largest circulation in London early the next morning. She wanted to stay one step ahead, manipulating public opinion before William had a chance to speak up. Once the press had framed Hale as a thieving psychopath, every accusation he aimed at her would automatically become untrustworthy garbage. But Camilla had made a fatal mistake. She thought this war only revolved around papers, ledgers, and computer data. She was certain that William and Timothy went to the countryside just to hear a verbal report and intimidate the bodyguard. She was completely unaware of the existence of the crisp audio file resting neatly in Sir Timothy's coat pocket. At the same time, on the speed race back to London, William remotely accessed the royal server and discovered that Clarence House's data vault had just been abnormally wiped clean. He immediately understood his stepmother was setting a counter-trap for him, and the testimony of a lowly bodyguard would quickly be crushed by her power. To smash this sophisticated cover, they needed a weightier confession from the very person holding the king's life directly in his hands. Exactly 11:45 p.m. The high-security detention centre, located in the southern suburbs of London, was submerged in a suffocating silence. The air reeked of cheap disinfectant mixed with the smell of stale coffee from the duty room. William used his prerogative as the heir to bypass all cumbersome registration procedures, stepping straight through the heavy steel doors and entering the sterile interrogation room. The royal doctor was sitting huddled on the iron chair bolted to the floor. His appearance was haggard, his hair messy, his two hands intertwined and trembling constantly from panic. William did not sit down. He didn't offer a greeting or beat around the bush to probe. He walked straight up to the cold stainless steel table, slammed Timothy's phone down and tapped the play button. Marcus Hale's panicked voice echoed across the four concrete walls. The bodyguard clearly declared the doctor's name, the time the money was given, and the method of receiving the envelopes at the palace's west wing. The doctor's eyeballs were filled with bloodshot streaks. His complexion turned from pale to ashen. The last bit of hope of denying the crime, clinging to silence, was crushed when he realized his accomplice had confessed everything to save his own life. William braced both hands on the edge of the table, leaning forward, creating immense psychological pressure. The doctor broke down completely, wailing and clutching his head. He confessed that the cash was only the beginning. Greed had swallowed his medical ethics. He not only followed Camilla's orders to reduce the dosage of the specific medication to a dangerous level. To maximize profits, he had taken it upon himself to contact black market sources, swapping a portion of the expensive cancer drugs with syringes containing saline solution. He had wholesale traded the monarch's life in exchange for a villa in Tuscany. The horrific picture of crime was pieced together completely. 8 o'clock the next morning, in King Charles III's private living room at Buckingham. The thick velvet curtains were thrown open, sunlight casting straight into the large room. King Charles sat leaning back in a red velvet upholstered armchair, the breakfast portion beside him untouched. He looked emaciated, his shoulders frail and his eyes exhausted. William and Timothy entered, personally slamming the double oak doors shut and sliding the lock from the inside. Without giving anyone a chance to interrupt, William walked straight over to the tea table. He placed the phone down in the middle of the table and pressed play on the full recording. The bodyguard's voice rang out piercingly, followed by the choking sobs and the clear testimony of the doctor. Every word of confession about counterfeit drugs, hush money, and forced signatures pounded straight into the monarch's eardrums. Charles sat stiffly. The teacup in his hand shook violently, hot water sloshing out, dripping onto the hand-woven wool rug. His face was as pale as a soulless corpse, his eyes staring blankly into space. The wife he loved more than his own life, the person he had once confronted the whole world to protect, was the very person draining his blood day and night. His weak lungs wheezed with every heavy breath, tears welling up in the corners of his deeply wrinkled eyes. A pain of betrayal, piercing to the marrow, caused the old king to bow his head into his hands. He sobbed in choking gasps, his entire worldview having just shattered into pieces. William stepped forward, taking one knee on the carpeted floor right next to his father's chair. He tightly grasped the monarch's freezing hand. The successor's voice hardened, carrying the weight of the Windsor dynasty's history, declaring that the throne could no longer be manipulated by a murderer disguised as a queen. King Charles slowly raised his face. Tears still lingered on his cheeks, but the despair in the depths of his eyes was being extinguished, replaced by the icy block of ruthlessness. The fierce love of decades had been strangled by Camilla's own hands. Now, in front of William, was no longer a betrayed husband, but a king looking straight at the nation's greatest enemy. 2 hours later, a top-secret summons was issued, demanding the entire Privy Council to urgently gather at the windowless meeting room in the palace basement. Would they tear open this facade with a shocking public trial, or silently bury the filthy truth to save the last shred of face for the blood-stained crown? The Privy Council concluded its underground meeting after less than 2 hours. A ruthless sentence, yet completely invisible to the public eye, was executed immediately. Camilla Parker Bowles was stripped of all practical executive power. She was no longer allowed to attend any family gatherings. Her name was crossed off the list of royal representatives on all diplomatic tours. The massive charity funds that once bore her name were instantly transferred to other members to manage under the guise of internal operational restructuring. Camilla is now under house arrest, right in her own lavish bedroom in the East Wing of Buckingham Palace. Her entire loyal entourage was fired and replaced with new people overnight. Her daily meals are brought by security personnel. They received absolute orders not to speak a single word of greeting to her. She still lives in luxury. She still has designer dresses filling her closets. But she can never walk through the oak doors to see King Charles again. She is locked away amidst gold-plated walls. A few corridors away, King Charles III continues the grueling rotation of a head of state. He still appears on the palace balcony. He still wears perfectly tailored suits from Savile Row. He smiles amiably for the global press cameras. But the night shift room attendants notice the king frequently stays up all night. The tray of food brought into the office late at night is often brought out untouched the next morning. His body weight has significantly dropped. Charles carries a deep wound that cannot be healed by any medical method. The ultimate betrayal of the woman he spent his whole life protecting has drained the old king's vitality. He tries to force himself up to run the country with nearly absolute security supervision and support from Prince William and Sir Timothy Lawrence. Lieutenant Marcus Hale never returned to the gate guard unit. The bodyguard is being hidden in a safe house not on the map. He lives under the strict surveillance of the Domestic Intelligence Agency. He has a new identity, a stipend, but must live in the haunting fear of being eliminated for the rest of his life. The once prominent royal doctor quietly submitted for early retirement, citing declining health. He was taken to a remote nursing home, stripped of his medical license, and banned from leaving England indefinitely. The entire counterfeit drug smuggling ring was uprooted by the police under the guise of an ordinary economic crime sweep. Not a single newspaper sniffed out the connection between that arrest and the king's health. Everything was cleaned up to a terrifying degree. This perfect cover-up creates a safe facade for the monarchy, but it also leaves behind risky voids. Camilla was stripped of all power, but King Charles still allows her to retain the title of Queen Consort on all official documents. The public still calls her by the highest noble title. Is this a shrewd political move to save royal face, hiding the filthy truth from the prying eyes of the media? Or is it watering a dangerous seed germinating right in the heart of the palace? An ambitious woman who once had the ability to manipulate both the medical and underground financial systems is now cornered. Will she resign herself to living the rest of her life in silence, or is she sharpening a more brutal retaliation plan when she has nothing left to lose? This story also shatters the glamorous facade of charitable organisations. If a queen could easily exploit a medical loophole, using undeclared cash to force her husband to sign asset transfer papers, then how many other massive cash flows are circulating outside the law? The cross-audit system, praised as the tightest in the world, was broken by just a few tens of thousands of pounds in cash handed over in a deserted corridor. The strength of supreme power lies in the ability to control assets. But when the boundary between the national treasury and personal pockets is blurred by greed, who will be strong enough to step up and check the ledgers of those sitting on the throne? And from the deepest perspective, the relationship between King Charles and Camilla forces us to reconsider the limits of sacrifice. That man was once willing to turn his back on his family. He faced the wrath of millions of British citizens just to bring the woman he loved to the pinnacle of fame. He placed his life and his throne in her hands. But the thing that smashed his heart was not pressure from the public, it was the greed for power. When the crown is seen as a tool for plundering, is the deepest love strong enough to hold on to humanity? Or is it merely a fatal weakness for someone else to step upon? What do you think about the Privy Council's decision to hide all the crimes and still let Camilla retain the title of Queen Consort in name? If you were sitting in King Charles III's position during that moment of confrontation, would you choose to publicly expose the whole truth to punish the one who betrayed you? Or would you choose to swallow the bitterness to protect the reputation of an entire dynasty? Please leave your thoughts right in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel so we can discover together more secret files and the most brutal confrontations hidden behind the doors of the power elite.